Mikhail Bakhtin, Medieval and Renaissance Folk Humor. As its title clearly indicates, Bakhtin's Rabelais and his world is not directly concerned with Erasmus, but by emphasizing a major tradition in medieval and Renaissance thinking, it illuminates a great many areas other than its primary subject. Bakhtin, who was born in 1895 and died in 1975, wrote his book in 1930 but could publish it only 35 years later. It was translated into English in 1968 and promptly achieved international success. The tradition that Bakhtin explores has its origins in the serio-comic writers of antiquity like Lucian and Apuleius, but also in the mock orations of medieval universities and in the rough, colloquial, semi-sacred jocosities of fair and marketplace. Stylistically, these various elements do not so much combine as jostle together in the mixed, incongruous mode sometimes referred to as a gallimaufry. Of the three elements that Bakhtin distinguishes in Rabelais, ritual, spectacle, parody, and Billingsgate, only the latter is not conspicuously present in The Praise of Folly. A section of Bakhtin's introduction is reprinted here as a preliminary sample of his approach. He was primarily a critical theorist, and the amplifications of his theory are of intense contemporary interest. But much that he says about Rabelais will be of direct interest to a student of Erasmus, as he himself points out. The aim of the present introduction is to pose the problem presented by the culture of folk humor in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and to offer a description of its original traits. Laughter and its forms represent, as we have said, the least scrutinized sphere of the people's creation. The narrow concept of popular character and of folklore was born in the pre-Romantic period and was basically completed by von Herder and the Romantics. There was no room in this concept for the peculiar culture of the marketplace and of folk laughter with all its wealth of manifestations, nor did the generations that succeeded each other in that marketplace become the object of historic, literary, or folkloristic scrutiny as the study of early cultures continued. The element of laughter was accorded the least place of all in the vast literature devoted to myth, to folk lyrics, and to epics. Even more unfortunate was the fact that the peculiar nature of the people's laughter was completely distorted. Entirely alien notions and concepts of humor formed within the framework of bourgeois modern culture and aesthetics were applied to this interpretation. We may therefore say without exaggeration that the profound originality expressed by the culture of folk humor in the past has remained unexplored until now. And yet the scope and the importance of this culture were immense in the Renaissance and the Middle Ages. A boundless world of humorous forms and manifestations opposed the official and serious tone of medieval, ecclesiastical, and feudal culture. In spite of their variety, folk festivities of the carnival type, the comic rites and cults, the clowns and fools, giants, dwarfs, and jugglers, the vast and manifold literature of parody, all these forms have one style in common. They belong to one culture of folk carnival humor. The manifestations of this folk culture can be divided into three distinct forms. 1, ritual spectacles, carnival pageants, comic shows of the marketplace. 2, comic verbal compositions, parodies both oral and written, in Latin and in the vernacular. 3, various genres of Billingsgate, curses, oaths, popular blazons. These three forms of folk humor, reflecting in spite of their variety a single humorous aspect of the world, are closely linked and interwoven in many ways. Let us begin by describing each of these forms. Carnival festivities and the comic spectacles and ritual connected with them had an important place in the life of medieval man. Besides carnivals proper, with their long and complex pageants and processions, there was the Feast of Fools, Festa Stultorum, and the Feast of the Ass. There was a special free Easter laughter, Risus Paschalis, consecrated by tradition. Moreover, nearly every church feast had its comic folk aspect, which was also traditionally recognized. Such, for instance, were the parish feasts, usually marked by fairs and varied open-air amusements, with the participation of giants, dwarfs, monsters, and trained animals. A carnival atmosphere reigned on days when mysteries and sodies were produced. This atmosphere also pervaded such agricultural feasts as the harvesting of grapes, vendange, which was celebrated also in the city. Civil and social ceremonies and rituals took on a comic aspect as clowns and fools, constant participants in these festivals, mimicked serious rituals such as the tribute rendered to the victors at tournaments, the transfer of feudal rights, or the initiation of a knight. Minor occasions were also marked by comic protocol, as for instance the election of a king and queen to preside at a banquet for laughter's sake, roi pour rire. All these forms of protocol and ritual based on laughter and consecrated by tradition existed in all the countries of medieval Europe. They were sharply distinct from the serious official, ecclesiastical, feudal, and political cult forms and ceremonials. They offered a completely different, non-official, extra-ecclesiastical, and extra-political aspect of the world of man and of human relations. They built a second world and a second life outside officialdom, a world in which all medieval people participated more or less, in which they lived during a given time of the year. If we fail to take into consideration this two-world condition, neither medieval cultural consciousness nor the culture of the Renaissance can be understood. To ignore or to underestimate the laughing people of the Middle Ages also distorts the picture of European culture's historic development. This double aspect of the world and of human life existed even at the earliest stages of cultural development. In the folklore of primitive peoples, coupled with the cults which were serious in tone and organization, were other comic cults which laughed and scoffed at the deity, ritual laughter. Coupled with serious myths were comic and abusive ones. Coupled with heroes were their parodies and doublets. These comic rituals and myths have attracted the attention of folklorists. But at the early stages of pre-class and pre-political social order, it seems that the serious and the comic aspects of the world and of the deity were equally sacred, equally official. This similarity was preserved in rituals of a later period of history. For instance, in the early period of the Roman state, the ceremonial of the triumphal procession included on almost equal terms the glorifying and the deriding of the victor. The funeral ritual was also composed of lamenting, glorifying, and deriding the deceased. But in the definitely consolidated state and class structure, such an equality of the two aspects became impossible. All the comic forms were transferred, some earlier and others later, to a non-official level. There they acquired a new meaning, were deepened and rendered more complex until they became the expression of folk consciousness, of folk culture. Such were the carnival festivities of the ancient world, especially the Roman Saturnalias, and such were medieval carnivals. They were, of course, far removed from the primitive community's ritual laughter. What are the peculiar traits of the comic rituals and spectacles of the Middle Ages? Of course, these are not religious rituals like, for instance, the Christian liturgy, to which they are linked by distant genetic ties. The basis of laughter which gives form to carnival rituals frees them completely from all religious and ecclesiastical dogmatism, from all mysticism and piety. They are also completely deprived of the character of magic and prayer. They do not command, nor do they ask for anything. Even more, certain carnival forms parody the church's cult. All these forms are systematically placed outside the church and religiosity. They belong to an entirely different sphere. Because of their obvious sensuous character and their strong element of play, carnival images closely resemble certain artistic forms, namely the spectacle. In turn, medieval spectacles often tended toward carnival folk culture, the culture of the marketplace, and to a certain extent became one of its components. But the basic carnival nucleus of this culture is by no means a purely artistic form nor a spectacle, and does not, generally speaking, belong to the sphere of art. It belongs to the borderline between art and life. In reality, it is life itself, but shaped according to a certain pattern of play. In fact, carnival does not know footlights. in the sense that it does not acknowledge any distinction between actors and spectators. Footlights would destroy a carnival, as the absence of footlights would destroy a theatrical performance. Carnival is not a spectacle seen by the people. They live in it, and everyone participates because its very idea embraces all the people. While carnival lasts, there is no other life outside it. During carnival time, life is subject only to its laws, that is, the laws of its own freedom. It has a universal spirit. It is the special condition of the entire world, of the world's revival and renewal in which all take part. Such is the essence of carnival, vividly felt by all its participants. It was most clearly expressed and experienced in the Roman Saturnalias, perceived as a true and full, though temporary, return of Saturn's golden age upon Earth. The tradition of the Saturnalias remained unbroken and alive in the medieval carnival, which expressed this universal renewal and was vividly felt as an escape from the usual official way of life. Clowns and fools, which often figure in Rabelais' novel, are characteristic of the medieval culture of humor. They were the constant, accredited representatives of the carnival spirit in everyday life out of carnival season. Like Triboulet, Févrial, or Le Furial, was the court fool of Francis I and of Louis XII. He appears repeatedly in Rabelais under the name of Triboulet. Like Triboulet at the time of Francis I, they were not actors playing their parts on a stage, as did the comic actors of a later period, impersonating Harlequin, Hanswurst, etc., but remained fools and clowns always and wherever they made their appearance. As such, they represented a certain form of life, which was real and ideal at the same time. They stood on the borderline between life and art, in a peculiar mid-zone, as it were. They were neither eccentrics nor dolts. Neither were they comic actors. Thus, carnival is the people's second life, organized on the basis of laughter. It is a festive life. Festivity is a peculiar quality of all comic rituals and spectacles of the Middle Ages. All these forms of carnival were also linked externally to the feasts of the church. One carnival did not coincide with any commemoration of sacred history or of a saint, but marked the last days before Lent, and for this reason was called Mardi Gras or Carême Prenant in France and Fastnacht in Germany. Even more significant is the genetic link of these carnivals with ancient pagan festivities, agrarian in nature, which included the comic element in their rituals. The feast, every feast, is an important primary form of human culture. It cannot be explained merely by the practical conditions of the community's work, and it would be even more superficial to attribute it to the physiological demand for periodic rest. The feast had always an essential, meaningful philosophical content. No rest period or breathing spell can be rendered festive per se. Something must be added from the spiritual and ideological dimension. They must be sanctioned not by the world of practical conditions, but by the highest aims of human existence, that is, by the world of ideals. Without this sanction, there can be no festivity.